Welcome to Whispers of Wisdom, a channel devoted to exploring great books not as passive entertainment, but as tools for deep reflection, inner challenge, and transformation. Here, we don't simplify difficult ideas to make them comfortable. We slow down, examine them carefully, and allow them to confront us honestly. In this ongoing series, we are moving through Friedrich Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, a work structured in 4 powerful parts, each one more demanding than the last. This book is not meant to be agreed with easily. It is meant to be wrestled with. In this 6th video, we enter part 2, covering chapters 23 through 27. These chapters mark a turning point in Zarathustra's journey. He confronts his own reflection, reclaims joy after disillusionment, challenges the morality of pity, exposes the hidden psychology of priests, and finally turns his gaze toward those who proudly call themselves virtuous. This is where the tone darkens, where illusions are stripped away, and where morality itself is placed under the microscope. This is Whispers of Wisdom, and this is Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Part 2, Chapters 23 to 27. Chapter 23, The Child with the Mirror. Zarathustra awakens from a troubling dream, and this awakening is not merely from sleep, but from a deeper certainty about himself. Because the child with the mirror is not an external figure, but a symbolic messenger from the innermost depths of the soul, representing innocence, truth without calculation, and the merciless honesty of reflection that shows not what we wish to see, but what is actually there. And in this dream, the child approaches Zarathustra, holding a mirror that reveals his own face, distorted, wounded, or altered. And this moment becomes the turning point of the 2nd part, because Zarathustra realizes that the world has changed him, that his teaching has been misunderstood, misused, or hollowed out by those who heard it without living it. And the mirror does not accuse. It simply shows, which is far more dangerous than accusation, because there is no defense against reflection, only acceptance or denial. Zarathustra understands that every teacher risks becoming a caricature of his own message once it leaves his mouth, that words travel faster than wisdom and are easily adopted by vanity, fear, or resentment. And the mirror shows him not his original vision, but its shadow in the world, revealing that his teaching has already begun to harden into doctrine, to be repeated instead of embodied, admired instead of lived. And this realization fills him not with pride, but with responsibility, because the child does not mock him. The child simply holds the mirror, reminding him that innocence sees without interpretation. And therefore the deepest judgment comes not from enemies, but from what is pure. Zarathustra recognizes that he must change, not abandon his teaching, but deepen it, sharpen it, and withdraw from those who would turn it into comfort. Because the mirror reveals that his image has become too familiar, too easily accepted, too quickly claimed by those who have not earned it through self-overcoming. This chapter reveals a crucial insight. That transformation is not a single ascent, but a repeated process, that even the one who teaches self-overcoming must overcome himself again and again, because stagnation can arrive disguised as success, and approval can be more dangerous than opposition. The child, symbolizing the future and the possibility of renewal, confronts Zarathustra with the truth that his task is not complete, that he cannot remain where he is, because remaining would mean allowing his message to decay into slogans and identities. And thus, the mirror becomes a call to solitude once more, to silence, to distance, so that the teaching may be reborn rather than fossilized. Zarathustra sees that the world does not simply receive ideas. It reshapes them according to its own weakness, turning calls to strength into excuses for domination, calls to freedom into masks for indulgence, and calls to self-overcoming into labels for superiority. And this realization wounds him deeply, because he understands that the responsibility of the Creator does not end with creation. It extends into guarding against misuse, knowing when to speak and when to withdraw, when to reveal and when to remain silent. The child with the mirror thus represents the ruthless clarity required for genuine growth, the willingness to look at oneself without flattery, to see not only intentions, but consequences, not only vision, but impact. And Zarathustra accepts this vision without bitterness, understanding that pain is the price of honesty, and that the path forward requires shedding yet another skin. He resolves to descend again into solitude, not out of despair, but out of fidelity to his task, because the mirror has shown him that becoming is never complete, that even the strongest vision must be reforged, lest it become an idol. And this is where the second part truly begins, with the recognition that the greatest danger to a teaching is not rejection, but premature acceptance, and that the greatest danger to the self is believing that it has arrived. Zarathustra learns here that innocence is not ignorance, but courage, that the child sees because it has not yet learned to lie to itself, and therefore the child's mirror is more truthful than any praise or criticism. And through this confrontation, Zarathustra recommits himself not to being understood, but to remaining true to the deeper rhythm of becoming, even if that means being misunderstood, even if that means being alone once more. The chapter closes not with resolution, but with tension, because Zarathustra now knows that his journey must grow harsher, more selective, and more inward, that the next teachings will not be for the many, but for the few, not for comfort, but for transformation. And this realization sets the tone for everything that follows in the second part, where joy and sorrow intertwine, where affirmation deepens through suffering, and where the task of self-overcoming becomes not a heroic gesture, but a lifelong discipline demanded by the mirror that never stops reflecting. Chapter 24. In the Happy Isles. Zarathustra now speaks from the Happy Isles, a place that is not geographic, but symbolic, representing a state of inner ripeness where creation becomes possible again after solitude. And this chapter marks a tonal shift in the second part, because having confronted his own reflection in the mirror of the child. Zarathustra now reemerges not hardened, but clarified, carrying joy that is no longer naive, an affirmation that has survived disillusionment. And he begins by speaking of the body and the earth with renewed devotion, rejecting once again all teachings that seek salvation beyond life. Because the happy isles are not an escape from the world, but a deeper embrace of it, a place where one no longer needs to justify existence through suffering or promise redemption elsewhere. Zarathustra proclaims that he is done with half-hopes and tired ideals, that he now desires only what affirms life completely, including its cruelty, its impermanence, and its contradictions. And this affirmation is not blind optimism, but strength that has passed through doubt and emerged intact. He speaks here of the Übermensch not as a distant prophecy, but as a necessity born from love of the earth, because humanity, as it exists, is unfinished, a bridge rather than a destination. And the happy isles symbolize the moment when one stops clinging to humanity as it is and begins joyfully working toward what it could become. Zarathustra's joy in this chapter is intense and overflowing, but it is disciplined joy, not indulgent pleasure, because he has learned that joy which avoids pain collapses at the first challenge, whereas joy that includes pain becomes resilient and creative. He speaks of laughter here, not as mockery, but as power, as the ability to laugh even at one's highest hopes without betraying them, because laughter signals freedom from rigidity, from idols, from absolute seriousness that hardens into dogma. Zarathustra criticizes those who cannot laugh at themselves, seeing in them the seeds of fanaticism. And he insists that creation requires lightness, the capacity to dance even while carrying heavy truths. The happy isles are thus islands of creative affirmation, where the spirit is no longer weighed down by resentment against life, fate, or the past. And from this place, Zarathustra declares his love for the earth once more, stating that his highest loyalty is not to heaven, morality, or tradition, but to life as it unfolds here and now. He revisits the idea of eternal recurrence indirectly, suggesting that only those who can affirm life so fully that they would will its repetition are worthy of creating future values. Because value creation demands responsibility, not only for one's actions, but for their eternal consequences. Zarathustra's speech here is poetic and expansive, filled with images of sunlight, fruit, ripeness, and sea winds, all symbolizing abundance that has matured rather than rotted. And he contrasts this with the sickly sweetness of false optimism, which denies suffering and therefore collapses under its weight. He warns against teachers who promise happiness without strength, peace without struggle, and meaning without discipline, calling such promises narcotics for the weary rather than nourishment for the strong. In the happy isles, Zarathustra speaks not to the tired, but to the ripe, to those who have endured enough disillusionment to no longer seek comfort in illusions. and who are therefore ready to affirm existence without guarantees. He speaks of friendship again, but now as shared affirmation rather than mutual consolation, where friends do not rescue one another from despair, but challenge one another to remain strong, honest, and creative. And he praises solitude not as isolation, but as the condition that allows one to bring something genuine back to others. Zarathustra's voice carries gratitude here, not gratitude toward gods or destiny, but toward life itself, including its wounds, because each wound has sharpened his vision and stripped away false hopes, leaving behind a clearer, harder joy that does not need permission. He speaks of becoming as endless, reminding his listeners that the happy isles are not a permanent dwelling, but a moment of clarity between struggles, a place one visits after surviving storms, not a shelter from future ones. And this insight prevents joy from turning into stagnation. The chapter subtly warns that even affirmation can become an idol if one clings to it, and that the Creator must always be ready to leave even the happiest island behind in pursuit of deeper becoming. Zarathustra ends by reaffirming his love for those who seek the earth with open eyes and strong hearts, those who do not curse suffering nor worship it, but transform it into strength. And the happy isles thus stand as a vision of what becomes possible when resentment is overcome and affirmation is earned, setting the emotional and philosophical foundation for the confrontations that will follow in the second part, where Zarathustra will once again descend among humans, carrying not hope as consolation, but joy as challenge. Chapter 25, The Pitiful. Zarathustra now turns his gaze toward pity, not as a gentle virtue, but as a hidden danger. And this chapter is sharp precisely because it challenges one of the most celebrated moral instincts, forcing the listener to confront how often compassion disguises weakness, resentment, and the desire for superiority. Because pity, as Zarathustra sees it, rarely strengthens those who receive it and almost never purifies those who give it. He begins by observing how the pitiful cling to suffering, not always their own, but the suffering of others, because it grants them meaning, moral authority, and emotional leverage. And he sees how easily pity becomes a subtle form of domination, where the one who pities stands above, while the one pitied is fixed below, frozen in their weakness, and quietly denied the dignity of overcoming themselves. Zarathustra does not deny suffering. He denies the worship of it, because when suffering becomes sacred, growth becomes betrayal, and those who attempt to rise are often punished for abandoning the identity of victimhood that others have grown attached to. He speaks of how pity multiplies pain rather than alleviating it, because it dwells on wounds, repeats stories of injury, and binds individuals together not through shared strength, but through shared weakness, creating communities of mutual stagnation that call themselves humane, while quietly resenting anyone who escapes. Zarathustra sees how pity flatters the ego of the giver, allowing them to feel good without becoming strong, to feel moral without risking transformation. And he warns that this form of goodness is cheap because it costs nothing except the dignity of another. He contrasts pity with genuine help, which aims not to soothe, but to sharpen, not to console, but to challenge, and which often appears harsh precisely because it refuses to confirm weakness as identity. Zarathustra admits that he himself once felt the pull of pity, once wanted to rescue, to heal, to carry others. But he learned that carrying too long weakens both the carrier and the carried, because strength grows only through resistance, and a life protected from struggle is a life denied its own becoming. He speaks critically of those who surround themselves with the pitiful as proof of their own goodness, warning that such environments drain vitality, creativity, and joy, replacing them with heaviness, guilt, and obligation. And he insists that one must choose carefully whom to help and how, because indiscriminate compassion becomes cruelty in disguise. Zarathustra's rejection of pity is not coldness, but discipline, a refusal to participate in emotional economies that reward weakness and punish strength. And he urges the listener to ask whether their kindness truly serves growth or merely preserves suffering in a more comfortable form. He observes that the pitiful often resent joy because joy exposes their attachment to pain, and he notes how laughter and strength are frequently accused of cruelty by those who have made suffering their moral capital. Zarathustra does not call for indifference. He calls for respect. Respect for the other's capacity to endure, to struggle, and to transform. Because to assume fragility where strength could emerge is to insult life itself. He insists that one should not protect people from hardship, but help them face it, not by sympathy that dissolves resolve, but by example that demonstrates what is possible beyond pain. In this way, Zarathustra reframes compassion as something earned rather than automatic, something that must be guided by wisdom rather than impulse. And he concludes that the highest form of care is not to weep with the suffering, but to stand firmly enough that others may learn how to stand as well. The chapter leaves the listener unsettled because it dismantles comforting moral certainties, but it also clears space for a stronger, cleaner relationship to suffering, one that neither denies it nor glorifies it, but uses it as raw material for becoming. And in doing so, the pitiful prepares the ground for the confrontations to come, where Zarathustra will expose other virtues that secretly serve weakness rather than life. Zarathustra now turns toward the priests, and his tone becomes neither mocking nor enraged, but penetrating, because what he confronts here is not a group of individuals, but a type of spirit that has learned to rule through weakness rather than strength, through guilt rather than creation, and through interpretation rather than action. And he begins by acknowledging the intelligence and subtlety of the priestly mind, recognizing that priests are not fools, but strategists who have mastered the art of psychological power. By discovering how to transform suffering into authority, Zarathustra observes that priests arise where life has become difficult, painful, or chaotic. Because in such conditions, people hunger for meaning more than truth. And priests step into this hunger by offering explanations that soothe rather than strengthen, interpretations that justify suffering rather than overcome it, and narratives that turn pain into proof of moral superiority. He sees how priests do not deny life outright, but reinterpret it, draining it of its raw intensity and replacing it with a system of values that rewards obedience, humility, and endurance, while quietly condemning strength, joy, and self-assertion as dangerous or sinful. Zarathustra identifies resentment as the hidden engine of priestly power. Resentment toward life as it is, toward the strong who affirm it, and toward instincts that refuse to submit. And he explains how priests convert this resentment into moral law, disguising revenge as righteousness and impotence as virtue. By declaring suffering meaningful, they gain authority over those who suffer, positioning themselves as intermediaries between pain and purpose. And thus, they do not heal wounds, but sanctify them, ensuring that the wounded return again and again for interpretation rather than transformation. Zarathustra is particularly sharp in exposing how priests cultivate guilt, because guilt is a renewable resource, endlessly generated by natural instincts that are declared sinful, ensuring that no one can ever fully escape moral debt. And in this system, forgiveness becomes another form of control, administered selectively to reinforce dependence. He notes that priests often appear gentle, compassionate, and self-denying. But beneath this surface lies a will to power that operates through the inversion of values, where weakness becomes moral superiority and strength becomes moral danger. Zarathustra contrasts this with creators who affirm life even in its cruelty and therefore have no need to reinterpret it away, because they transform suffering into strength rather than sanctify it. He acknowledges that priests once served a purpose, providing structure and meaning in times of chaos. But he insists that what once preserved life now suffocates it, because the priestly worldview freezes humanity at a stage of development where obedience replaces becoming and consolation replaces creation. Zarathustra also observes that priests fear laughter, because laughter dissolves the seriousness upon which their authority depends. And he notes that wherever laughter spreads, guilt weakens, and wherever guilt weakens, priestly power erodes. He speaks of how priests divide the world into pure and impure, saved and damned, righteous and sinful, because division simplifies control, turning complex human experience into moral categories that can be administered and judged. Zarathustra does not deny the suffering of those who follow priests. He denies the solution offered, because it keeps suffering meaningful but permanent, interpreted but unresolved. He urges the listener to recognize how easily one internalizes the priest's voice, turning guilt inward, policing one's own instincts, and mistaking self-denial for virtue. And he warns that this internalized priest is often more powerful than any external authority. Zarathustra's critique reaches its peak when he declares that the priest's greatest triumph was convincing humanity that life itself requires justification, because once existence is treated as a problem, those who offer answers gain endless power. Against this, Zarathustra affirms life without justification, without appeal to higher courts, insisting that existence is not a trial to be endured, but a force to be shaped. And he calls for a new kind of honesty that no longer seeks redemption through denial, but strength through affirmation. The chapter closes with Zarathustra standing firm against priestly morality, not out of hatred, but out of fidelity to life, recognizing that the struggle against priests is not merely historical, but internal, a struggle to silence the inherited voice that whispers guilt where courage is required. And in doing so, the priests becomes one of the most radical chapters of the second part, dismantling the psychological foundations of moral authority and clearing space for values rooted not in resentment, but in creative power. Chapter 27, The Virtuous. Zarathustra now turns his attention toward those who proudly call themselves virtuous, and his critique here is especially unsettling because it is directed not at obvious enemies of life, but at those who believe themselves its guardians. And he begins by observing how virtue, when practiced without self-knowledge, easily becomes another form of vanity, a polished mask worn to secure approval, authority, or inner comfort, rather than a genuine expression of strength. He notes that the virtuous often speak loudly of their goodness, not because goodness overflows from them, but because they need constant confirmation that they are good, and this need reveals an inner fragility, a fear that without recognition, their identity would collapse. Zarathustra sees how many virtues are born not from abundance, but from fear, from the desire to avoid punishment, social rejection, or inner guilt. And he argues that such virtues do not elevate life, but tame it, producing individuals who behave correctly while remaining inwardly small. He criticizes how the virtuous turn their habits into laws, mistaking personal limitations for universal truths, and then judge others harshly for failing to conform, thereby transforming virtue into a tool of domination rather than self-overcoming. Zarathustra observes that the virtuous often cling to rigid rules because rules relieve them of the burden of thinking, choosing, and risking, allowing them to hide behind obedience while feeling morally superior. And he warns that wherever virtue becomes inflexible, life withers, because growth requires experimentation, failure, and the courage to contradict oneself. He speaks sharply of the pleasure the virtuous take in condemnation, noting how easily moral outrage becomes a substitute for creation, offering a quick sense of power without the labor of transformation. And he exposes how the virtuous often need sinners in order to feel righteous, quietly depending on the very behavior they publicly denounce. Zarathustra contrasts this with the Creator, whose actions are guided not by external codes, but by inner necessity, and who may appear inconsistent or even immoral to those who worship fixed virtues, because creation follows life rather than rules. He insists that true virtue is not uniform, but singular, shaped by temperament, strength, and purpose, and that to demand identical virtues from all is to flatten human possibility into mediocrity. Zarathustra also points out how the virtuous often mistake restraint for mastery, believing that suppressing instincts is the same as transforming them, when in fact, repression leaves instincts intact but resentful, waiting for expression in distorted forms such as judgment, cruelty, or hypocrisy. He observes that many virtuous people are tense, joyless, and suspicious of pleasure, interpreting joy as moral danger rather than evidence of vitality. And he argues that a virtue that cannot laugh, dance, or forgive itself has already turned against life. Zarathustra challenges the listener to examine their own virtues, asking whether they arise from fear or strength, from obedience or creativity, from resentment or affirmation. Because only virtues born from abundance can give without demanding repayment, and only such virtues can endure without hardening into dogma. He emphasizes that the highest virtues are often misunderstood because they do not announce themselves. They do not seek recognition, and they do not require an audience. And he suggests that genuine virtue is often quiet, even invisible, because it is absorbed into action rather than displayed as identity. Zarathustra's critique reaches its sharpest point when he warns that virtue can become the most refined form of ego, more difficult to overcome than crude selfishness, because it disguises itself as selflessness. And he urges the listener to risk being misunderstood rather than cling to moral approval that suffocates becoming. The chapter closes with Zarathustra calling for a reevaluation of virtue itself, not its abandonment, but its liberation from fear, rigidity, and vanity, inviting a form of goodness that flows naturally from strength, joy, and self-mastery. And in doing so, the virtuous prepares the ground for the next confrontations, where Zarathustra will turn toward the crowd, the rabble, and the forces that flatten individuality in the name of equality, exposing yet another mask worn by weakness to secure power over life. In this video, we began part 2 of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, stepping into some of its most psychologically revealing chapters. We faced the mirror of self-recognition, where even the teacher must confront distortion. We stood in the happy aisles, where joy returns, but only after illusion is burned away. We examined pity and how compassion can quietly preserve weakness. We exposed the priestly mind, where guilt becomes power, and we challenged virtue itself, asking whether it flows from strength or fear. Together, these chapters reveal a difficult truth. not all goodness serves life, and not all morality strengthens the soul. Part 2 has only begun. The coming chapters turn outward, toward the crowd, resentment, revenge, culture, and fate itself. The questions grow sharper. The resistance grows stronger. If this journey has challenged you so far, explore the earlier videos in this playlist and stay with whispers of wisdom as we continue deeper into this extraordinary work.